Today we're going to be doing a Bowverhaul. So what is a Bowverhaul, you might ask? A Bowverhaul is what I do at the end of every season or prior to my hunting season. Essentially what I'm doing is giving my whole bow an oil change, that full inspection, lube everything, clean everything, and make sure any type of wearable part is at least at 75% capacity and ready to get me through the whole year without having to go into an archery shop. I think that that's critical. So for this particular one, my buddy Jay Byers, amazing photographer, sent me his bow that he has been using for a full season. So I thought this would just be the perfect time to talk about the what's and the whys that I do for a Bowverhaul. So the first thing that I'm going to really do is I'm going to take an air pressure nozzle, or you can take compressed air, and just try to blow as much dust and dirt off this thing and all the little parts that you possibly can. And it makes an annoying sound, so we've already done that. We're not going to do it for you now. But then we're going to go through and we're going to clean everything up and wipe everything down and just try to get it cosmetically clean to where we can do a little bit better inspection. Right away, there's several things that I've noticed on this one. There's obviously some string wear here in certain spots. Now, he is 2 seasons with this particular string, so it's my opinion that he's ready for a new string, just because I know with Jay's schedule, he's been in a lot of elements. There's a lot of questions on when to replace a string, but realistically, all you need to think about is if you're really wanting to know, do I replace my string or not, and you're on a budget, then the main thing you got to look for is if there's any servings that are completely cut and unraveling, or if there's strands that are coming off, noticeable strands that are coming off, those are definite replace a string type thing. A lot of times wear areas are going to be here in the cam area where it goes around the hump of the module. So right in here there would be wear for you to inspect. This is actually really good, and kind of a common thing with this cam system. There's not a lot of wear. Some there are. Now another wear area is going to be where your cables are moving fast through your cable rod or roller guard or cable guard type system. So for this one, I'm just going to pull this around, and you can actually see right here, there's noticeable wear there. Nothing's cut, but we're literally 1 strand away from being cut right there. So a lot of this is bunched up. You can see right here, there's some serving that's kind of bunched up, and really it's ready to come off. So this is a good candidate for, let's just go ahead and replace those strings and cables. And a lot of this is based on, again, the weather and how much you're putting in reps with your equipment. You know, strings are a wearable item. Same with cables, they're a wearable item. Cords going to your arrow rests are a wearable item. Your launcher blade is a wearable item. One of the things that happens, this is a perfect example right here. You can see this rest is actually a little bit off the shelf, which is just an indicator that this cord over time is stretched. So if we take the slack out of that cord, we can get that arrow rest back down into the right position. Which is an easy adjustment, but it's obviously something that you need to take note of. This blade is also seeing a lot of wet weather, and I can see that there's a few little spots where it's showing some rust. So in those spots where there's rust, obviously there's going to be corrosion. So a blade replacement is also a wearable item, something that needs to happen. String loop. Take a look here. You can see this string loop is definitely, it's still integratable, but his knock points are starting to wear. That center serving is building that flat spot where it's maybe not spinning so freely with the arrow knock. You can tell his strings have just stretched over time, so you know we can see a gap here which normally isn't there. This has probably got moved around to the wrong spot too, so there, we can fix that. But all these are just quick things for me to look at where it's like, yep, I know right away, at least he would need a replacement serving there. He's definitely going to need knock points, D-loops replaced, and definitely time for a center serving. So I'll go through and we'll talk about those things, but we'll also talk about just a full string swap as well. But once we get it in the press, we're going to go ahead and clean all the cam tracks and check the movement of the cams and see how those work. But overall, we're just doing a full assessment, and anything that's wearable, we can replace, which is it's an update, it's a maintenance. It's no different than changing tires on your truck or your car. So those types of things have to happen. I can also show you, some different ways in some other videos to just make quick in the field repairs of these. So, maybe check out separate videos on how to repair a broken serving from us, and you'll be able to see that type of thing going. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the press and give it a wipe down first. So one of the things that's cool, if you do your own fletching and you've had the Max Clean wipes that we sell to clean the arrow shafts, these wipes are also perfectly safe to use on your bow. So to just use these and give everything a full clean is super easy and non-invasive on your parts. The other thing that you'll want to have is you'll want to have some Q-tips around just to get into some of those hard to reach spots. And then once I take the pressure off the string, I'll also clean those cam tracks. Now, one other thing to inspect, which I just felt this, one area that takes a definite beating is the bottom of your cams, depending on how rough you are on your gear. This looks like this cam has been set either on horseback where it was pouncing on something, or the back of an ATV or something where it took a beating. So let's see if you can hear that. So that's rough edges. In those spots, we're going to want to take a very high grit sand or even a rat tail file, and we're going to want to smooth those over. Now, if any of those have a ding that's bent all the way in that case, we're going to need to replace the cam. But these are all things that you should take note of and be aware if you need to make a change. But overall, the bow looks like most people's at the end of a season, just in need of a little TLC. So first thing, we're just gonna wipe things down, get in there, get around your cams as best you can. Just remember, one of the things that's gonna cause the most damage, in my opinion, when it comes to archery gear is gonna be vibration on the road, whether it's putting your bow in the backseat of a truck on a gravel road, or whether it's on a horseback, or honestly even on planes traveling. If you don't pack them the right way, a lot of these smaller little screws that never had much for Loctite on them, they will start to rattle out over time. That's just how it goes. And so one of the things that we're going to do last is what I refer to as lockdown. So I really have 3 steps. Right now, we talked about the cleaning part, which is what we're doing. The next is going to be lubrication, and then the third will be lockdown. So clean, lube, lock it down. That's my steps to a maintenance. Now, another thing that you can do too to really help this process is, as you shoot archery in different types of weather conditions, just be mindful that if you take your bow from a super hot outside and then you bring it into air conditioning, or if it's in air conditioning super cold and you take it out and you see it start to sweat, if it's sweating and then you pack it in a case, well, now you have moisture on certain parts that can rust, and that's going to be a problem. What you really want to do is you want to make sure that anytime your bow gets wet, try to get it dry. You know, try to bring it somewhere where it has the ability to dry off or where there's moving air. That's going to be important. Another thing that's going to help prevent this type of Bowverhaul is not leaving your bow out in your hot vehicle. I know people like to take them to work and have them with you sometimes on a break, but you know, if you live anywhere below the halfway point of the US and you're keeping your bow out in your vehicle during the summer, then you're just asking to have strings and cables prematurely settle or stretch out, or servings come loose because of those strands stretching out. Gosh, it looks pretty dang good right now, doesn't it? Yes, it does. Caleb, does that look good? Yeah. All right. So, yeah, just remember, weather wears. Weather wears you out. Okay, so we've done that. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just check these cam tracks. So I'm going to adjust the bow press here for this particular bow, which I did not do ahead of time. That way I'm keeping it real, folks. Keeping it real. So if you are not 100%, 100% that you know how to press a bow and press it to the point where your cam track is letting tension off your string, if you're not comfortable with that, then either watch another video and try it on your buddy's bow. That's the best way to get comfortable with it. Try it on your buddy's bow. Otherwise, just take it to a shop and just say, hey, give me a repair, you know, give me a Bowverhaul. And here's something that's awesome about this. One, this is a great way to support your shops too. Archery shops thrive off, you know, being a professional, and, you know, honestly, their labor services offer them more margin than a lot of the products they sell. So you coming in and saying, hey, I'd really like, you know, a full tune-up and maintenance, then that's going to show support to your shop, and your shop is going to show support to you when you're in a position of something went wrong during a hunt and you are in an emergency situation. The other thing I'll recommend to you is, you know, if you're going to be getting something like this done, don't take it in 2 days before hunting season starts. This is something that you want to do literally months before, or at least a month before. Honestly, you know, if you know you've got some big hunts in September, it just might be in your best interest to go into your shop in the middle of the summer when they're slow and people are out doing family vacations or hiking and fishing, and take your bow out and take your bow to them and say, hey, you've got, you know, a month to get this done, do it right. And utilizing that downtime is pretty critical. Okay, so I've taken the strings and cables off, and so one of the things that I can do is I can just go around these with a Q-tip, and right there I snagged. So that right there will cut a string serving without a doubt. So I'm going to definitely fix that, and then I'm going to go through and I'm going to go around all these tracks just like this and just get all these tracks cleaned out with my Q-tips. And again, when you're doing that and you all of a sudden feel a snag and it starts pulling off that cotton, then you know that that cam has damage on there, and you really want to clean that up with the rat tail file, which I'll grab one and clean this out. Now, the other thing that you're wanting to do at this point, now that most of the bow is clean and we've taken off the strings and cables, I like to go ahead and just spin these and see what kind of movement you have in both of your cams. These are both great. It doesn't show signs of corrosion that's got into the axle or the bearings of the cam. If this is kind of restrictive in how it moves, then at that point it might be a good idea to let the pressure off this and pull these axles out of the cams and look at the axles. There's two things to look for. One is going to be any type of rust. If they're rusted and you know that that corrosion could be causing a lubrication problem, then obviously it's time for new axles and possibly new bearings. Some companies, the bearings come out easy. Some companies, you're going to have to get a new cam with a bearing in there. But what you need to do, if you pull it out and it looks fine, go ahead and clean it good. Run a Q-tip through that bearing and then use a dry lube only. I don't like to use a wet lube in that area because any type of dirt you're attracting there or any type of lubrication will let dirt stick to it. And that's going to cause more grinding and more wear of the part. So a dry lubrication is needed. This is also kind of like, at least PSE's version is kind of like a cam. These are bearings that spin. So if you spin any of these and they're not spinning properly, then that's a sign that your roller guard might need to be replaced. And these are all pretty low cost items. This cam feels good, but I'm gonna go ahead and find a little file so I can clean that burr up and make this smooth. Now you saw all those burrs on Jay's cam, and even though everything looked fine when it was on there, now that I've taken this string off, you can see that this is actually cut where those burrs were. You can see the wear and tear and you can see that it's cut. Now what I'll tell you is, if you notice something like that on a hunt in the field, it's kind of like having a loose filling. If you start playing with it, it's gonna come out. You know, take a look at it and make sure there's not like visible strands hanging out. Now, these were just pieces of serving. And if that slowly over a hunt kind of came a little bit undone, you might be okay for like your one kill shot that you need at that hunt. But if something like this is happening on your hunt and you can't fix it, then the last thing you need to do is shoot every day. Like if you notice something like that, just be like, crap, I somehow cut my serving, shoot one arrow. If like you're on, just say, I'm not gonna shoot any more until it's kill time. However, if that hunt's over, this is like, get in the shop and get this dealt with. So obviously that cam was cutting this, and there's a good chance those first fibers are nicked as well. This is 100% reason why we're gonna do a full string and cable swap for Jay. Here's the two types of files that I have. I honestly don't really know the names. I've had them for a long freaking time. This is what I call a rat tail file. Maybe it's not even that, but it looks like a rat's tail. This one looks like a stomped chipmunk tail. So it's a chipmunk file. This is very, very fine. So if you want to focus in on how nice and fine that is. This isn't gonna take meat off your cam. It's just gonna literally make a nice, smooth, round edge in that spot where we're a little bit rough. So here on the outside of the cam, I'm gonna use this flat part. Now the smashed chipmunk file is flat on one side and has a radius on the other. Which is a very, very practical file for me. I use it a lot. Now, since Jay packed this bow in a bunch of foam peanuts, I mean, I halfway want to just take a grinder into the side of this guy's cam, because anybody that's going to send me their bow in 7 million foam peanuts and I have to get it out of the box and then vacuum my floor, it's kind of grounds for me wrecking your bow. But since we're on video, I won't do that to Jay. All right, it's feeling a lot better. Now this little file here works really nice in these cam tracks. So this is the rat tail file. And you can, well, I don't know if you can. I can kind of hear when it's hitting that real rough part. And you just do not want any type of burr on a string serving, because that will just lead to, and you can maybe grab a close focus right here, Caleb. As I'm kind of doing this, there's just dust-like particles that are coming off, but that's still smooth other than right there. So just trying to clean up those areas are really important. And this honestly brings up something that I think is important to touch on when it comes to bow maintenance. Is how much bow maintenance you have to do is really based on how bad you treat your gear, or what I refer to as bow etiquette. And I feel like if you're always setting that cam down in rocks, or if you're never paying attention to the bottom of your cam that's either in a scabbard or hanging down off the bottom of your pack and bouncing on the rail of a ATV or something like that, then you're going to have major problems. So you really need to always think about your cams and your strings. If you have real rocky terrain, don't set your bow down where your cam is hitting. Tip your bow, hold your string and set your bow down to where the stabilizer touches the ground, and then your limb pockets touch the ground. And that way you're not, wrecking your strings, cables. That's awesome right there. So you can see it's just super quiet too. So we've done a really good job of cleaning any of that up, and that's pretty awesome. Now, if you're worried about the silver, which I know some people are, then you can temporarily make it look cool by just putting a Sharpie on there. You can touch it up with a Sharpie and it'll black it out. Otherwise, you look like Jay and you look like you actually use your bow. So let's go ahead down to this cam. Let's go through this one. And you can see, like right there, all that is just grit and grime on a wearable part. I mean, it is a string. It's not a steel cable. It's not Teflon coated. I mean, that is 100% a stringed fiber that is going to cut if you don't go through it properly. So you can see with that cam, here's what we got out. Looks like Caleb's ears after a hunt out west. And you can give it one more wipe down after that. Go through these cams. Now after I've wiped it down, I'll kind of keep that folded thick like that so I can put it in that track and then just roll the cam around it. So now you can see there's barely anything in there, and you can do that in all of the different tracks, and you can see now we're clean. So when it comes to this part, we're good to go. Yeah, this looks great. Okay, so now once you've done this, you can either put your strings and cables back in and go through any type of maintenance that you might do on that. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually put on a brand new set of strings and cables for this particular setup, which is going to require a whole new setup, which is fine. But I'm going to go ahead and do that string and cable replacement now, and I'll pick back up with me doing the knock points and D-loop. Bowverhaul halfway point. So I just replaced strings and cables for this bow for Jay. Now another thing that I did upon inspection was his arrow rest definitely showed some rust and some wear, so I replaced his launcher. So now I've got his launcher replaced, his strings and his cables were replaced. So now for this particular one, I need to go ahead and get his knocking point back to center and get his bow pretty much set back up. But again, if you're not having to do a full string and cable replacement, then maybe you only have to do one of these next steps, which is either going to be maybe you need to just replace your knocking points, which Jay's needed before. His knocking points were clearly worn out. His serving was worn out. So with this new one, we're going to be good to go. But I'm going to go ahead and tie these knocking points in the right place, put his D-loop and his peep sight in there. So you're more than welcome to follow along with me as I do that. First thing I need to do is grab one of his arrows, and I'm going to clip that arrow and put it on his arrow rest at 90 degrees with the arrow rest up, so that I can then tie his knocking points. Knocking points, I use a 3D center serving. We have this at knockonarchery.com. We also have the most common center serving diameters too, and we also offer a center serving jig tool. So these are all like mandatory items that you have, just like any cook needs a knife and olive oil and salt and pepper. Some 3D material, honestly a .021 minimal, you might want to have the .25 as well, is important for that center serving. And the 3D can be used for replacing servings or repairing servings somewhere. They can be used for knocking points, and they're also great for tying in peep sights, and I use them to like tie certain parts of the cord down on the arrow rest as well. For tied knocking points, I always do the top one first. And again, this arrow right now, when it's in the rest, is at 90 degrees. And it's important that that does not move on you. And so first I'm going to do is I wrap this around twice. I'm going to tie what I refer to as double over and under knots. So I'm going to get this as tight to the knocking point as possible without actually moving it. Right there. I'm going to pull this as tight as my fingers will allow. Kind of get that slack out of there. And again, it's double. So it's 1, 2, tighten. So that's on top. The previous one was under. Now this is over. So now we're going to do another one on the bottom. So essentially this is our third tie. Here's our fourth. Fifth. Now for the sixth, I want 3 columns on the top, which this is going to be our 6th tie. So I've got 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. So for this one, I'm actually going to tie 1 time, so a single tie. I'm going to tighten this down right in between columns 2 and 3. So as I pull this tight, it is going to squish right between columns 2 and 3. And once it's done that, I'm going to tie 1 more time on top of it, completing a square knot. Flames go up, so I'll use the radiant heat and melt that knocking point in. Now what I like to do now is I'll actually remove the bow from the press, and I will double check this. So I raise it up, make sure I slide my nock tight against my nocking point, just make sure I'm still at 90, and I'm right at 90, so nothing moved. And now that I've done that, I'm able to put it back in the press and do my bottom nock. So now I'm going to do the bottom nocking point. And for this, I've got my arrow nock tight against that top nocking point. 1, 2. What I do is I'll slide this up kind of tight like this, and then I'll just kind of wiggle that nock just a little bit so I have just a half a thousandths of space right there. There's not much string pinch on this particular model at all, so I really don't need much of a gap. Now on the top here, if you remember, we did 1, 2, 3 columns. On the bottom, we're going to do 4. So I just did 1, 2, completing number 1. Here's 3, which is starting the second row. Now 4 finishes second row. You can see right there I have a little bit of space when I tighten that up. So on this next one, I want to make sure I get rid of that space. So as I tighten this right here, I'm going to push up, get that out of there, get that space out of there, just like that. You want your nocking points tight. Remember, that's why we're Bowverhauling them, is because they had some separation before. Okay, so this is starting the 4th column. That completed the 4th column, so now I have 4 rows. So I'm going to finish this off by tying 1 time between rows 3 and 4. Right there between rows 3 and 4, I'm going to pull that tight, suck it in there. I'll tie 1 more time on top of that same single tie, completing a square knot that now lets me finish my nocking points. Perfect. All right, that's great. We've got nocking points tied. Now we're going to go ahead and put this peep sight back in. So I've got his old string right here, and you could see all this was definitely due for some new TLC anyway. But I'm just going to lay that right there, and then you can just slide this temporary string separator that comes on most good strings, and slide that in there. So I'm going to line that up right there and there. That way I know where to put his peep sight in to be in the exact same spot. Perfect. And now one thing that you can do, and I'll show you this, if you are doing a Bowverhaul, let's say you decided to do a string and cable change just based on the fact of, hey, you want to have a new string and cable, you don't want any chances of anything going wrong, which is cool. But if your old string and cable weren't trashed, these could be lifesavers on a hunt. So for the price of an extra peep sight, you can keep your old peep in your old string and take your old set of strings and cables with you in your travel bow case. You can put it in a Ziploc bag and you're totally like good to go no matter where you are. You don't have to worry about them having strings and cables in stock in case there's an accident, which I've been part of many times. Or if you don't want to have to buy a new peep, you can take your old Peep out of the string, like so. But more importantly, you can mark that with a little marker. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to lose the true center of that string where the Peep was, because if any of those strands are flipped, that'll start to rotate. So then what you can do is you can get a little piece of leftover string material or serving material, put it through there just like that, and just tie one simple little knot on there like this. And that way the center of your string is marked, and even when that's back like that, you can easily just pull on this tab and separate it back up for your Peep sight. But having your old set of strings and cables just as an emergency backup is definitely a good insurance policy to have. I always tell people to keep a set on them. And from there, we've got our Peep marked. Got our Peep set right here. So you guys watching, and gals, there's a lot of gals getting after it on their own equipment, which is freaking awesome. So you guys are getting the live roll here. So remove this little piece. That's your true center. You do not want to lose your true center of the string. Put your Peep back in there, just like that. Now I know he was at 5 3/4. Boom. And if you're an at-home bow press person, make sure you're always in your cam tracks, maintain tension on the string as you let the, geez, look how perfect I am. Now that Peep is in a perfect spot right there. Once I tie it in, it is going to be good to go, at least for first 100 or so shots until it gets into some Salt Lake City heat. Okay, so I'm going to go, well, he actually wants less green, sucker. I like green nocking points because I can knock my arrow in a blind or in the dark in a tree stand and have my setup totally ready to go. I like being able to see where it is rather than have to feel where they're at if they're black servings like this. But I'm going to go ahead and give them some black Peep serving just because it's what Jay wanted. So for this, these are going to be simple over and under knots. So I'm going to start out with just one tie above the string like that. I'm going to pull it tight, boom, and you can see I'm not in the spreading part of the string. I'm down here where the string is perfectly round. And that'll help keep it tight. So I'm just doing over and under knots stacked in a row like a perfect noose. And I like to do about 22 of them. So okay, right there. So this will be my last one. My last one, I'm going to tighten this down between the last two columns. So I'm going to tie one time here on the top. I'm going to tighten that down right between these last two columns right there. And then tie one more time on top of that to complete a square knot. Just like that. You can see how clean that looks. It's nice. So I'm going to do the other side here quick.
You said 22, is that 22 rows or just 22 ties?
22 ties.
Okay, gotcha.
I'm on tie 2, 3, 4. So as I said 22, I was talking actual ties, not columns. 7, 8, 9, halfway there right now. $20, $21. Here's 22, boop, on the bottom. So the last one, again, I'm going to tie between the last 2 rows right there. Tie it tight. One more time on top. And a quick, easy tip for getting your peep knots slid up tight to your peep is simply have like a 1-foot piece of D-loop material like this. Now, when I tie my peep knots, I like to tie them where the string is perfectly round, not where it's starting to spread apart. And the reason I do that is because now I can take this D-loop material, wrap it around the string like this, take it to the bottom of your knot, and then slide it up close to the peep site, just like that. And it really tightens the peep into that string, and it allows you to tie a super tight knot underneath or above the peep where the string is perfectly round, and then you can slide it into position. And once you've done that, your string should, after a few shots, be trained back to center, and you should be good to go. But a little piece of D-loop material like that, pull it tight, slide those knots up close to the peeps, a great way to do it. So you can tie really tight knots where the string is round, but yet then get them up close to that peep site so it really squeezes it into position. Last thing I'm going to do to a string quick is just tie his peep sight in. When I tie my peep sights, all I do is go over the top like this. I'll tie one time, and then I'll go to the top, and I'll tie one time tight, like that, and then one more time on top of it to complete a square knot. And that way you don't ever have to worry about your peep ejecting out of the string, which has happened and can put an eye out. In a lot of tournament situations, this is mandatory with rules for safety reasons. But I personally like tying nocking points above and below the peep, sliding them into position so they snug down the peep sight really tight, and then I put that tie around it just like this. Now what's nice about what I just showed you right there is if we wanted to remove this, all you have to do to remove it is put a razor blade right underneath that knot right there, and you can cut it, and you're never having to touch the side of your string or try to cut this off your string. So it's really nice for removing it. But that is my preferred way of tying in a peep. I know there's tons of different ways to do it, but it's my experience that the one thing that moves more than anything on a bow is strings, because it's a material, it's a fiber, and it reacts to heat, it reacts to cold. Once wax starts to come out of it, it starts to change. So if that peep is moving at all and I need to add a twist into my string or a couple twists into my string, the last thing I want to have to do is undo all my serving that's going around my peep. Instead, I could just make one little cut. I can put a twist in my string, flip my peep around, make those 2 simple ties to put it back in, and you're totally good to go. Replacing D-loops is something that you know you're gonna have to do not just on a Bowverhaul at the end of the year, but it's probably something the more you shoot, the more you may have to do it. What's awesome about a D-loop is that it's wearable and replaceable, and if you're tying your nocking points on, you can change out your D-loop without affecting your highs and lows. So all I do for a D-loop is I'll take about a 1 foot piece of D-loop material. That's my preference. I don't prefer pre-cut D-loops. Some people will buy a pre-cut piece with burnt ends and they just try to fish it through and then just try to spread it with a pair of Nock pliers, and that doesn't get it totally tight. It gets it tight in the middle, but not on the outsides of those knots. So here's how I do it. I'll take this piece of D-loop material and I'll make a J just like this. And this piece here needs to be a couple inches long to help you. And you're gonna, for a right-handed shooter, you're gonna put it on the left side of the string on the top of the nocking points. You're gonna take this little loop that's on the bottom, you're gonna push it to the other side, and you're gonna feed both of these through and take out that slack, just like that. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna try to really work on getting this short tab underneath this longer tab so that I can make all this as tight as possible. You don't wanna have a gap in there like that. That is no. So you want it tight, just like that. I'll normally squeeze it with a pair of D-loop pliers. I'll grab as close as I can, and I'll roll. And then I'll squeeze and take that space out so that it's tight. Grab and roll. You can see I've got a very, very tight D-loop right here. One more time, okay. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut that tab off, leave about, I don't know, 1/4 inch maybe. I'm gonna fuzz that up just like that. And then I'm gonna burn this little ball. Okay, there's one side right there. Now I'll take this whole piece and I'll pull it tight and get as much slack as I can out of this middle piece. Before we tighten this outside piece with the pliers, now we've got this middle piece. Okay, so now we've got this tight into place. It's coming straight up, and we are on this side of the string on the top, the left side on the top. Now we're gonna go over to the right side on the bottom. And what you'll notice is that's causing this D-loop to have a natural turn in it, which is the same as when you're holding your release aid. It's the same way that it's gonna twist. Okay, so I'm gonna get this loop approximately a 1/4 inch shorter than my desired finish length. And I'm gonna take this long tail and I'm gonna feed it through and try to take as much slack as I can out of there. Pull it tight. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over to the right side of what I just did. I'm gonna go under the string and back up through the middle of my D-loop. And again, try to get as much of that slack out of there as you can. Grabbing with the pliers and rolling so that I'm taking this slack out of here. I'm also going to squeeze this a little bit to get the space out of there. Go up close, grab, roll. So you can see how tight that is. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this off. Right there. And in order to burn that, I'll actually hold my center serving and roll it so that it's pointing straight up. Fuzz this up without loosening that. You want to fuzz that. Perfect. So now we're going to get our D-loop into position. You can see our peep is here. Our peep is pointing straight back. We're going to get our D-loop position in the center of that peep. And then we're going to take our pliers, go inside, and stretch it that last 1/4 inch to our desired length. Then we're good to go. Now the last thing that I need to do here on Jay's, since he did need a full string and cable replacement, is I'm actually going to go ahead and put my new cord going up to his rest. That's the only thing I really need to do, which any of you out there who have done that in the past, I took his old one off to reuse it. So I am going to be able to go there, take the slack out, lock it down into position, and from there, his bow is going to be completely overhauled to right where it was before. We'll have to check it through paper since we did do a full knock and D-loop, but for the most part, this thing is, I would say, 3 times better than it was not too long ago. Strings and cables were chewed up. We had that cam with that sharp burr on it. There was all kinds of dirt and crud inside there, so we did that. And from here, we're gonna move on from the first step. We're gonna move to that second step, which is gonna be, we're gonna lubricate a few things once I get this rest button down, and we'll talk about that. I've got the arrow rest all secured. Arrow rest is in place. Gave it a quick check. I'm liking where everything's at. Now, one thing I want to say, obviously we just did a full string and cable change out, but one of the great investments that I made was having one of these bow carriers. These things are so nice because they just protect your strings and cables. I don't always have this on when I'm going to my stand or wearing it on my backpack, but I can tell you that if I'm traveling, I have this around my strings and cables in my bow case. If I'm putting this in the back of a truck and taking a long ride somewhere, I put this on just because you will be amazed at how much you can prevent that wear and tear by just having one of these. This is one that Sika makes. There's several different brands out there. That one fits cams and the strings and cables, and it also has a little pocket that goes around your sight, which is really, really nice, and it'll be an important preventative. Now, the next thing when we talk about our yearly maintenance in Bowverhaul is going to be your arrows. So obviously, if you're missing a fletching, you go ahead and redo this. You can also go through, and I just take my thumb and I press on my vanes, left side, right side, I mean, you don't want to try to break the vane off, but left side, right side, just like that. Inspect your nock. If your nock is had an impact on it, then you want to for sure replace the nock, but you also want to inspect to make sure there was no carbon damage from a possible Robin Hood. If you've got a vane like this, where you've got a hole shot through it, again, this is a perfect candidate for being able to just do a complete refletch of that arrow. From there, once you've gone through all of your fletchings and your nocks, I then like to go through all my arrows and spin them properly and do what's called a flex test. If you have a carbon arrow, it's where you press the arrow on your leg and you roll it up and down like this. And if there's damage, you'll hear that damage. So for example, this arrow would be a candidate because when I look at this arrow, I can see where this arrow has some damage right here, but honestly, it's got damage on both sides in this same spot, and I can tell that's mainly just from passing through a target or possibly where it's been sitting in his quiver, moving up and down. And so by checking it like that, and I know I'm not having any cracks, then those arrows are good. Plus I'm spinning it on my finger. It's spinning really true. So that's what you have to do for all your arrows. Then when it comes to your release, so for a release, depending on the type of release you use, getting a Q-tip and just kind of getting off the excess debris is going to be important. So first step, I like to go through, get in there, get as much of the thicker debris off that you can. And then what you want to do is get high pressured air for a handheld release, at least the one that I use. I put air pressure through the back in this small crack. I'll press air, blow it through that way. I'll blow air through this way. Then what I'll do is I'll take 1 drop of this release lube. So depending on the type of release, we have this lube that's made specifically for releases where it does not attract dust, and it actually helps clean those internal parts out. So what I'll do is I'll fire that release, then I'm gonna take 1 drop and try to put a drop where I can get it down into that casing just like that. Get it in there, go ahead and wipe off the excess and fire it a few times. You can tell almost immediately that you don't have any of the binding or the cock or the spring clicking when you're cocking that release. On a caliper style release, open it up, get in there as best you can, high pressured air, give it a little drop of the release lube, then go ahead and force air through it 1 more time to just get out anything that lube has loosened up and started to break up in there. You can go ahead and blow it out and you're totally good to go. So other than getting Jay's fletchings dialed in, and this one's definitely not the good one. So right there is the good one that I'm happy with. This thing is totally lubed and ready to go. The last thing that I do, and honestly I do this anytime I'm going on a hunt, even if it's not the end of a season where I'm doing a Bowverhaul, the last thing that I'm gonna do is just check every single screw that I can on this bow from top to bottom. So I'll start on 1 cam, and for example on this cam we've got 2 module screws right here, and then another module screw on the back. I'll start with those. I'll just check my limb pockets right here. Then I'll go up, just make sure my grip's tight. When you look at the arrow rest, I'll make sure this screw's tight. just double check these screws, you know, get a new little Allen wrench, get in there, check that that screw's tight, check that that screw's tight. See where you can, up underneath here, get underneath this screw, make sure that screw's tight. And if anything is loose, like noticeably loose, then what I'll do is get the lightest Loctite that I can, which is a purple, and I'll have a little purple Loctite that I'll put on any screw that's loose, or if you have a setup to where there's something notoriously that rattles loose all the time, sometimes the tolerance between the screw and that thread are just a little bit too big. A little bit of that purple Loctite will really help solidify those things. And once you've done that, you're locked down. So you are totally ready to tackle a full season again. Such an easy thing to do. It's honestly fun. This is kind of the end of winter right now. So heading into spring, Jay's got this thing fully dialed in and ready to go prior to tack season, prior to hunting season too. It's definitely going to last them through a whole season, but also gives them time just to check everything out, make sure everything's still working the way he's 100% comfortable with. But that's how you do it. Good luck, everybody.